Wow.
Welcome, welcome. Loving Maria, you look extremely glam this week. Your
I've had a
hair
bit.
and makeup's been happening.
Well, the hair's been done. Yeah, the makeup needs a bit of an overhaul. I need to get the cement mixer in. But the hair's been done. I went to see my hairdresser. Lovely. So I feel a bit zhuzhed up.
See, this is the thing about Maria. You're always raising the standard. I'm always going to have to figure out how to like take things up another notch with you.
Oh no, listen, you are such a great dresser. What is this? Are we just flattering each other today? What's going
Must be.
on?
We must be in a good mood. Well, today we have a phenomenal guest talking about going one step higher, always trying to improve things. Maria, you've surpassed yourself. You brought in a fantastic guest this week, Roger Fisk. Roger is a global communications expert, widely credited with key behind-the-scenes roles in Barack Obama's 2 presidential campaigns. He served in both administrations, leading trade and diplomatic missions all over the world, and more recently has been putting those experiences to work for Fortune 100 companies, causes, brands, and NGOs through his firm New Day Strategy. Roger provides analysis and commentary to Fox News, the BBC, Times of India, China Daily, Sky News, Bloomberg, and many, many others. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Good morning. I'm so amped up after that music. That's quite a way to start the day here at 8:30 a.m. in Washington, D.C.
I love it. James says to me, it sounds a bit like game show music, but it makes me smile. And, we need excuses to smile these days. So, Roger, thank you for joining us. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. And, you need a little bit of that panache, that little cheesy lounge kind of shot in the arm, for the beginning of shows. So to say it's a game show kind of feel is a good thing.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, listen, I'm going to start with a really big question for you. Let's just go straight to the juice. Right into it. Yeah. The Obama brand seems to be bigger than ever after 15 years. And I'm sure that anybody listening in, whether they are in business or whether they are a speaker, of course, speaker is also in business, but I'm sure they'd love to know, how do you sustain and continue to grow that popularity after 15 years?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me, and thank you, James, as well. And Maria, I really treasure the friendship and the collaboration that we've had over these many, many years. The answer is a very nimble balance. To begin with, way back at the beginning, because I started in January of 2007. Then Senator Obama said, listen, we're going to go out and we're going to say exactly who we are, exactly what we think, and exactly what we hope to do. And if people respond to it, then we'll move forward. We need to build an organization to allow us to absorb, people's interest and scale that. But we're not going to change who we are based on news cycles or trends or anything else. And essentially that core authenticity gave us a very fixed, strong, clear North Star for the organization to grow around. I always think of these things as kind of concentric circles. And as long as the core initial impulse, the individual that started it or the idea or the product knows exactly who they are and what they hope to provide, then everything else that arranges itself around that can echo that core belief and that core authenticity. And then after that, it's really just a question of building an organization that buys into this, that truly reflects those original kind of values and priorities, but then also can shapeshift and change with technological changes. For example, between the first Obama campaign and the second campaign, 2008 and 2012, for example, we had to navigate the migration from the desktop to mobile. Now, a lot of organizations or efforts would kind of lose a sense of who they are in the course of doing something like that. What we found was that actually strengthened us, because one of the core priorities also in an organizing kind of strategic sense that Senator Obama laid out in front of us was that the entire purpose of this organization is to give individuals the tools they need to enact change. And so even up through now, when you look at what he's doing with his foundation or what Mrs. Obama is doing, it still echoes those same core values that he laid out 14 years ago now. And that's how you are able to grow and scale. And then I think just on a gut level, people really really appreciate authenticity, and I think people feel like they're getting a clear sense of who these folks are, and that creates a foundation of trust and communication. And once you have that, you know, the sky's the limit.
I love that. And it's so simple, really, isn't it? You know, who are we? What do we think? What are we going to do? That's what everybody needs to clarify in their businesses, and to be authentic. And also the other point you made about not changing, not being swayed, I think is really good. And I hadn't thought about the change of desktop to mobile. That was a big deal, really. And in fact, mobile still seems to be the predominant, what's the word, platform, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the mantra now is mobile first, right? Like you have to start thinking of we barely ever talk about websites even more, right? We talk about apps, and that's inherently then playing on the ball field of mobile phones. It's much more about focusing on the individual, and then the time frame within which you can get people's attention is much quicker, because as we can all think of, back when some of us used to take subways or buses or Ubers or anything else, you really have, 3, 4, 5 seconds to get someone's attention because they're just scrolling through stuff. When they used to be sitting at a desktop, your window for engagement is much longer. You'll have people with 2 and 3 and 4 minute visits per page, when in the mobile context, that's 2 or 3, 4 seconds, which is why what's called the attention economy is so intense, and the competition to get people's attention, get those eyeballs and those clicks for even 3 or 4 seconds is really the name of the game right now.
Roger, you speak a lot about the importance of culture in communicating your message. So I'd love to know, I mean, how did the Obama campaigns use culture specifically in order to create that change that they wanted?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it gets more interesting as I get a little bit more distance from it. We were up against one of the examples I always use, or the metaphors is imagine just mixing up a bunch of random ingredients in your bathtub one night and then saying to yourself, like, well, let's go out and compete against Coke or Pepsi or something. I mean, we were up against the Clinton brand that had 2 decades of momentum in the American consciousness. And so we were the upstart, we were the renegade, we were the insurgent. And everyone that was the seasoned pro, everyone that was quote unquote the people you have to hire when you do things like this, they were all hired by someone else. So you ended up with this kind of scrappy startup, tinkering in the garage kind of culture. Because I, for example, would never have gotten the level of job that I did in the Obama campaign, in the Clinton campaign, because, all they had to do was kind of sound the trumpet and bring together all the people that they had for the last 20 or 30 years. The average age difference between our campaigns was about 15 years, for example. And so that startup mentality allowed us to just kind of be much more a product of the 21st century rather than the 20th century. And then that really started to inform how we did our onboarding. We had a very specific process that we put people through to try to basically kind of weed out some of the people that might not buy into the kind of larger kind of cultural goals, which were a selflessness, a politeness, a humbleness, still being very hungry, still being very strategic, but walking into things with questions and wanting to learn and listen, rather than walking into things with statements as if you already know everything. Because that's how you have to do it when you're a startup. If you're 15, 20 people in a startup and you think you already have all the answers, you're going to fail. You have to go out there and create more of a conversation with your targeted demographics or your potential customers or clients, rather than just being an established 20th century brand that just talks at people. So that's kind of the 2 or 3 kind of fundamentals of the landscape about how we were able to be a different culture. In essence, if you think of it a different way, because we were forced to be.
And you work with a lot of different companies as well. So I'm wondering that what you learned in terms of onboarding people into an organization, into a cause, they're coming in for maybe different reasons. They've maybe got their own specific causes that they're really passionate about, and you're trying to get them to come into this larger cause. I'm wondering, like, if you were having to do that whole thing again today, where we are not necessarily able to physically be together in the same spaces. I know this is a question a lot of my clients have with onboarding of new employees just now, is that before, they would bring them to the place, the offices, you could get the culture of the organization across that way, or you had large events for them. But with so much stuff happening online, that would be really challenging. So if you were kind of doing this, any kind of thoughts about how you would handle that onboarding, especially as it relates to culture today?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I did a podcast series with an organization in Singapore and talked to a bunch of CEOs about things like this. And what they ultimately, to kind of simplify their varied takes on this, was that the leadership really has to prioritize personal connections. And the CEOs and the SVPs and things like that need to be, picking up the phone and making sure they have 10 and 15 minutes of unstructured time with a new employee. The onboarding as well needs to be a two-way street, in the sense that this organization is bringing on this individual, but the organization, this reflects a lot of the work that I did with MIT, the organization's bringing on that individual for a reason, right? So the organization really should allow itself to inhale and exhale with this individual, and not just have that be speaking to them, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, this is what's expected of you. But there's a reason why the organization hired that individual, and the organization should be looking to learn, like, why did you choose to come here? What was it about our brand or our cause that got you excited about coming here? And use that to constantly kind of evolve and self-improve. And then I also think that an important thing is stretching the onboarding process out in that kind of feedback loop, 60 and 90 days, maybe even 6 months into the future, so that you can circle back with new employees and hear what their thoughts and their interpretations are of the organization, and where there's possible blind spots or room for improvement 60 and 90 days after they've come on board, because there's probably going to be a potential harvest of insights and thoughts about how the organization works, how decisions are made, how information flows around, and things like that. So my larger point is like not to think of it as just a single binary exercise where, on Monday someone's off, not on staff, and then on Tuesday they're onboarded, and on Wednesday they're done. But more think of it as more of a conversation stretched out over many months, so that the organization can really invite feedback and get thoughts about from people as they're acclimating, because there's opportunities for the organization to improve along with each new employee. And that's one of the things that we did in the first Obama campaign, was that everyone was consulted many months even after you joined, so that no one was just kind of checked off as a box and then put to work. It was something that there was a mechanism to actually follow up with people and create that feedback loop that's so important for culture.
Love that. That's really great advice. I think you might have answered the question I'm going to ask you, because you've said what you did in the Obama campaign. And what I want to ask you, because there were a lot of people involved in the Obama campaign, a lot of advocates as well. How did you get them all singing from the same hymn sheet? Was it that continual communication, or was there something else as well?
Well, in terms of like our supporters and volunteers, one of the seismic changes in terms of how we approached people was we created a tool for people to come in, and this is pre-Facebook, and actually create kind of a profile on our website where they could actually not just receive news and read updates about who we were and what we were doing and what our agenda was, etc., but the individual could actually come in and start to generate interest and generate activity. They could import their contacts from their email accounts, for example. And then if you were a nurse or a small business owner or a scientist or anything else, and you wanted to go out and reach like-minded people in that profession, or if you just wanted to reach out to people in your neighborhood or something like that, we gave people the opportunity to come into the website and actually not just receive activity, but actually generate activity, which to me is a perfect example of the organizational, that cultural value that we discussed at the beginning here, of not just looking at people as kind of standalone persuasion exercises, but really looking at them as part of a relationship, part of a conversation. And really our duty is to give them the tools to bring about change in their own lives, And by inviting people into our website, that was a perfect example. Instead of the 20th century version of just talking at people, like the old website model, who we are, what we're doing, where we're going to be, news clips, etc. We said, you come on in. You tell us what we should be doing. Should we be more active on nursing issues? And if so, what does that look like? How do we do that? And that really that's really the embryonic step of how you create a relationship that now in the context of millions of people has lasted 15 years.
I can see that being incredibly valuable to do whatever organization you are, whether you're running a presidential campaign or whether you are running a business, to have that relationship and also that exponential growth of more people becoming involved. Have you actually helped organizations do this too, as well as?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's some very simple things, right? Like, people respond better to questions than they do to statements. Right. It's a fundamentally different way of approaching people. Right. So if you just come up to people and say, we're valuable, that's different than saying, like, what's valuable to you. Right. So, for example, and that can take the shape of, I mentioned MIT earlier. They have, events and clubs and activity all over the world. And their model before I got involved was just to basically decide on an annual basis what the themes would be for conferences in Santiago and Singapore and Berlin. When I switched the model and said, let's do it from the bottom up, and 6 months out, let's get in touch with the alumni in Berlin and the alumni in Singapore. You tell us what people are talking about in Singapore. I'm sitting in a conference room at MIT. I don't know what people are talking about in Singapore. But that whole idea of flipping the pyramid, so it's not the headquarters talking down to people, it's the headquarters speaking to each individual and say, you tell us what matters to you. And once you do that, once you apply that kind of philosophy, which is not complicated, really, it can fundamentally change how you go about things, because then you're hitting people with questions rather than statements. And that changes the whole tone and the long-term value of what that conversation is going to be.
So are you continuing to work with the Obamas now that they've got podcasts? I think former President Barack Obama is here in Scotland next month for the COP26 conference. Are you continuing to do work with them?
Well, pre-COVID, I helped launch their Young Leaders Initiative for their foundation in Malaysia. And then much more fun was Mrs. Obama's book tour, which I coordinated a lot of the media events on, especially internationally. I did Ottawa up in Canada, and I was in London with her for 4 or 5 days. And if I can tell a quick little story, I tend to give celebrities a wide berth, right? So, for example, in Malaysia, when we did the Young Leaders Initiative, Julia Roberts was with us for a couple days, and we say hello and things like that. But when my approach to people like that is similar to my approach with the Obamas, when the whole world's trying to get at these people, I prefer to just give them about 20 or 30 feet. And then if they need me, I'll go over and I'll just discuss whatever needs to be discussed. But then for the most part, stay out of their way. But I do have a thing for corgis. And when I coordinated Mrs. Obama's visit to London, she went up to Windsor Castle to have lunch with a young couple that used to live there. And so that required me and the Secret Service and some other folks to go up there a couple times before she went there. And I shared with the guy, literally the guy who has the keys to Windsor Castle. And I'm not joking at all. He has the keys to Windsor Castle in his pocket. Was the guy who walked us around and showed us, what was going on. And by like our second or third visit, he goes, "You just missed her." And I didn't really know what he was talking about yet. And I was like, what just happened? And he said the Queen just came by on her horse with her corgis. So I had missed my royal corgi window during that trip with Mrs. Obama. But yeah, I continue to be involved with them, and it continues to be an honor and a blast.
And you have to be careful, because if you do things wrong here with the royal family, we put you in castles in the middle of nowhere, and we're going to leave you there.
From what I've seen, worse things can happen. But I guess we'd have to see the castle first, right?
We have some nice castles here if you want to come and stay.
I would love to.
Fantastic. James, I'm gonna switch to the next question, because I'm gonna leave that question that I'm supposed to ask for you to ask, because it's definitely a you question. So I'm going to switch it. Instead, I'm going to ask you, Roger, because I want to know what's happening in terms of events and conferences in the US at the moment.
Yeah, I think people are, first off, there's obviously a pent up appetite to just get back to whatever normal was. I think, the larger message is people, just as folks around the world, maybe a little bit different than Asia, but are approaching it a little bit more dial than switch, right? Which is kind of trying to modulate on like a month by month or quarter by quarter basis. There's definitely things coming back in person. I think what you're seeing, though, for a lot of your audience that are used to going out to, various conferences and seminars where there'd be 2,500 people in a ballroom or something seated, for a day or 2 days of activities, that ballroom probably has, 1,000 people in it, and that there's a couple feet between each chair, that, kind of how people get refreshments and how food is served and all those things have kind of changed. But then each state, due to the fact that, a lot of the power about regulating these things is with the states rather than the federal government. That's why you can see like a Texas and a Florida being, in some eyes, a little too eager to open, so that they've been burned a couple times. About a year ago, for example, Southern Florida was open, and I think it's widely accepted that they opened too much too quickly. So I think people are about two. If you look at it as like five, 1 through 5, like 5 is fully open. I think people right now are flirting with like around between a 2 and a 3. Trying to take those steps towards being responsible, but also trying to, operate on the show business idea of the show must go on. So I'd say it's cautiously optimistic, slowly taking steps back towards normal, but still realizing, with a public health challenge like this, you never know. We could be, you never know. We could be closer to the finish line. We could be closer to the starting line. There's just no way of knowing. So I think people are approaching it as more dial than switch.
Right. I think, yes, we're seeing that a lot, actually. Yeah, our numbers are going up, sadly, here as we record this at the moment and stream this at the moment. So fingers crossed they start coming down again.
Now, you mentioned their show business, no business like show business. So they called Judy Garland the triple threat because she could dance, she could sing, she could act. I always felt I had the pleasure of seeing President Obama speak before. And I always kind of sensed from him, he was like a triple threat. He was like amazing on stage. On TV, he's fantastic. And in social media, he's almost like a natural with that. Obviously, it's new to people his generation as well. So any advice that you would give speakers on how to translate their message across these very, very different mediums?
I think the most important thing is, back when I first started to work on press and started to work on writing talking points and then writing speeches and things like that, long before I ever gave speeches, I was writing speeches for John Kerry and people like that, is that there's a continuum and that there's an authenticity. Because, for example, like when people talk about novels, you never want like something to come out of the mouth of one of the characters that's like jarring, right? And is like inconsistent with the rest of the characters. So like being, very authentic and honest, for example, if you're kind of loud and boisterous and willing to take risks, then you should, roughly, maintain that kind of flavor across things. President Obama is relatively cautious, right? Like the no drama Obama kind of approach. But that's consistent. So I think one of the challenges is when you go from, the difference between delivering a 45-minute speech and posting a 140-word tweet or 140-character tweet, obviously is huge. But when you are, truly tuned into exactly who you are and what it is you want to say, there should be some kind of narrative cohesion there. And then that's the simplest way of trying to approach these things, because if you start to try to act out of character, or if you tell yourself like, I've got to get, more aggressive or more controversial or something like that, sure, it can kind of work. But like in the long run, you're not the idea is to have as lucid and simple a connection between who you are and the voice that you use to reach out to people. And the clearer that is, and the more honest it is, then the easier it'll be for you to maintain it, because all you have to do is remind yourself to be yourself.
There's an authenticity there. I remember seeing years ago that watching a President Ronald Reagan thing on stage, and it was just like such a natural in terms of being able to communicate, get his messages across. And I think a few years ago I was interviewing Dr. Nick Morgan, who I know in DC area, who coaches a lot of different politicians, and he told me there's a little thing that you see a lot of politicians do today, which is this kind of motion here, with the thumb and the hand. And he said, do you know how that came about, James? He said it came about because I don't know who coached President Clinton, but Clinton early on had a bit of a habit of doing the pointy finger thing.
Yeah, almost like a pre-stylist.
Yeah, you know? And it's kind of like you have to be careful with audiences like pointing fingers. So whoever his coach was, maybe someone leave in the chat if you know who the coach was, got him to do like just take the finger and put it down. And so we have a lot of politicians, more like the thumb. We have a lot of politicians here in the UK who do this. In fact, there's a famous politician here called Michael Gove who's doubled down on it. He does the two thumb thing as well. But when I saw President Barack Obama speak, he does one which is he does this. It's something with he's great at pausing between and after he lands a line, but he kind of does this kind of thing with his hand in terms of using his like getting to the point. It's almost like saying getting to the point. He uses his hands very, very well. So you've seen him on stage. You've seen Michelle Obama on stage lots of time. Is there anything that you noticed just from a fan of the craft of a communication that you saw and you thought they're pros, they know what they're doing there?
Yeah, both are very natural, right? I think Mrs. Obama had to work on it and just put in the hours to get to where she could be comfortable doing it. I remember I was with her early when she really started to go out and travel on her own and do multiple days, solo. We did about 25 stops over 5 days in South Carolina, for example. And she took it very seriously, and she devoured briefing material and things like that. When you mention timing, it's interesting because that's a very unappreciated skill, and it's probably one of the most difficult to learn, which is the cadence and especially when not to say something, right? When to leave those 2 or 3 second, 4 second windows. I always think of like, if you try to sing along with a Sinatra record, for example, it sounds like he's very effortless in how he sings. But if you try to sing along with it, everything is coming in kind of late. It's the timing of it is really, you don't realize it until you start to focus on it. But the timing of it is one of the things that really grabs you and holds you. And I think part of that, is just a natural gift. But I also think, in Senator Obama's case, being very, very tuned into the individual and watching, people, and I'll give it to the former president of the United States, President Trump as well. They don't share a lot of things, but they both know how to read a room.
Yeah.
And I would assume that's something that a lot of your audience is very tuned into as well. Because even I've, in my own small way, I've had, little, asides, stories, jokes, and I'll read the room and I'll say, you know what, I'm not gonna throw out that little story, that little aside. This is a very buttoned up crowd. Or if it's like, I remember one time in Australia, and like these folks were just like having a good time. I could tell everyone was really relaxed. So I told a couple of stories that weren't like in my prepared remarks, threw in a couple jokes, that kind of stuff, and it worked really well. But like, I think both President Obama and President Trump are unparalleled in their ability to read a room. And then when you use that as a feedback loop for how you think about getting your point across, that's almost really the secret sauce.
Very skilled communicators, very skilled. Roger, I'm sure a lot of people are asking, like, okay, I'd love to learn a bit more if they're maybe just hearing about you for the first time. What's the best way for them to kind of learn more about your work? If we have people watching just now who are maybe looking for a speaker to come in for the next upcoming conference, where should they go and do all that?
For speaking, I've been with the London Speaker Bureau since 2009. So, and I've been through 25 countries and been all over the world with those folks. If you want restaurant recommendations in Kazakhstan, for example, I can help you out. But that's it's londonspeakerbureau.com. My consulting firm is New Day Strategy, so it's newdaystrategy.com. And then any of my TV appearances and things like that can be found on YouTube or anywhere else. And I think at the end we have a slide where folks can grab my email address and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we're putting that on speakingbusiness.tv, aren't we?
Wonderful, perfect.
Exactly. So people go to speakingbusiness.tv. We're going to have all the links that we're speaking about there as well. I noticed as well, you have to do this interesting, it's a round table.
Actually, James, I think that's a mistake. I think that's for a different show. I'm just reading that. It's not. Apologies there.
Because we usually ask all of our guests to just kind of share like maybe a tip or the tool as we kind of finish up the show as well. Is there any things? Maria was very jealous of your microphone.
I am jealous of the microphone. Tell me about the microphone.
This is a toner. I don't think that windscreens do all that much, except they kind of look a little bit more official. So it kind of looks like I'm a little bit more serious than I am. But to James's question, because it's a serious one. When I did Maria's podcast about a year ago or so, we spent a lot of time talking about, or she was kind enough to listen to me talk about how much I've listened as I've gone around the world, because what I discovered was, it used to frankly kind of annoy me at the beginning when I started doing speaking engagements where you have to go have tea with the mayor or the CEO or something, like, in some little small green room, tucked away somewhere in the conference. And I was just like, all right. I mean, I was nervous, I'd rather just focus on doing the show. But what I learned was, and this is what I would leave your audience with, is, those 20 or 30 minutes have a lot more to do with the long-term flavor and relationship and value of that engagement. They really are more important than almost whatever you're going to do on stage. And what happened for me is, and I wish I had realized this earlier, but I did ultimately realize it 6 or 8 years ago, was that was when you were really getting the unfiltered feedback about what this organization wanted to do. Because when you do the conference calls with the marketing staffs and all that other stuff, like they're reading the tea leaves in terms of what the C-suite folks are thinking and stuff. But then when you sit down, in an unfiltered context with a CEO for half an hour, and it wouldn't be unusual that they would actually clear the room as well, where they would ask all their staff, all the people who think that nothing can happen without them, they would actually clear them out of the room, and we would have a completely unfiltered conversation about where that person is, where they're trying to get the organization, what they think their own strengths and weaknesses are, what some of the obstacles are. And I, quickly realized that this was, first off, a real honor. It was an honor to be brought into that level of trust by this individual. And then I was really, kind of lifting up the hood and looking directly into the DNA of that organization and exactly kind of where they wanted to go and things like that. So I quickly figured out that window that you are asked to spend in kind of a courtesy context, protocol context with the leadership of your host organization or something, you need to be very, very tuned into that, because that's how you really understand who these folks are and what they want to do. But also that's, just in a selfish context, that's how you create trust and communication, and ideally a long-term relationship with the organization.
You've just described one of the most important values of live in-person events there, not just the content, but the conversations, all those things that happen around the bit where you go on stage as well. Such an important point.
Absolutely. Well, listen, all that remains is to thank you so much for all your great advice. We thoroughly enjoyed it, and to have a great rest of day, because it's the morning for you.
It is. So enjoy everyone's evening or afternoon or wherever they are in the world. And thanks a ton for having me, and safe travels to you and to your audience as well.
Thank you.
So
thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Take care.